I've seen cruelty before, more times than I care to count, but that morning still made my blood boil. Someone had thrown a tiny life out onto a mountain road and driven away as if tossing out garbage. Coward. I still can't understand how anyone could look into eyes like that and turn away. The morning light was dim, the Pisgah forest wrapped in mist. Not a sound except the old growl of my pickup echoing through the trees. When I rounded the bend, headlights swept across the wet pavement, and that's when I saw it. A Doberman puppy, maybe 2 months old. Black and tan fur soaked through trembling in a puddle. So small I could count every rib beneath the skin. It just stood there, legs shaking, head bowed as if waiting for someone to call its name. But no one did, only the wind, and the hiss of my tires. For a second I thought I was imagining things, but then it lifted its head and our eyes met fear-hope, and something else all tangled together. The kind of look that asked, "Will you do the same? Will you walk away too?" I hit the brakes. The truck jolted to a stop in the fog. I opened the door, the cold wind cutting straight through my jacket. The air smelled of wet asphalt and rotting leaves like guilt itself. The pup didn't run. It only took a step back, ears pinned, tail twitching, a tiny spark of trust, still flickering somewhere deep inside. I crouched, careful not to stare straight at it. Years of rescue work had taught me that even a glance could feel like a threat to the betrayed. I kept my hand low, palm open. "It's okay, little one." My voice was soft, but my chest felt ready to burst. It sniffed the air, neck trembling. I could almost see the war inside it, the pull between the instinct to flee and the fragile wish to trust again. A gust swept through the trees, stirring dead leaves into a small spiral. It flinched, taking half a step back, and that's when it hit me. What I was looking at wasn't fear. It was heartbreak in a living form. It stood there, a small shadow in the fog, so lonely it hurt to breathe. I looked around, no houses, no passing cars, no footprints. Just muddy tire tracks and a cardboard box pushed against the ditch by the wind. Inside, a wet scrap of cloth with short black hairs clinging to it. Someone had put the puppy there and then left, drove off, and didn't look back. My throat tightened. I'd lost my wife once I knew what it was like when someone just disappears, but the worst kind of disappearance is the one you cause with your own hands. I pulled a piece of dried meat from my bag, placed it gently on the road, then backed away. The puppy looked at me, then at the food, then back again. In its eyes I saw a war raging, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Hope, flickering fear snapping at its heels. Anyone who's ever loved a rescued animal knows fear doesn't vanish with kindness. It only fades slowly with time. And maybe that was the only thing I could give it right now, time. So I sat down against the mile marker, saying nothing. The wind stung my face, cold and sharp. The puppy stood 4 meters away, watching. I don't know how long we stayed like that, minutes, maybe forever, but something started to change. For the first time, it took a step toward me, slowly, as if every inch costs courage. I didn't move. My heart pounded, but I kept my breathing quiet. It lowered its head, inhaled deeply, its small chest rising and falling. A distant truck horn echoed through the valley. The pup flinched but didn't run, just 1 step. That's all it took to make my eyes burn. Not from pity, but from awe. Because even in a world this loud, there are still souls brave enough to trust again. And right then, I knew this wouldn't be a simple rescue. It wouldn't just be about saving a dog. It would be about learning to wait for a miracle to arrive in its own time. The fog still hadn't lifted. The road through Pisgah Forest was so silent I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my throat. Night stood there a few meters away, body trembling slightly as if fear itself hadn't yet found a place to hide. I knew one wrong move, even a single step too fast, and everything would shatter. So I sat down slowly, my back against the cold mile marker by the road. The pavement was damp, soaking through my jeans. I reached into my backpack, pulled out another piece of dried meat, set it on the ground, and drew my hand back, leaving just enough space between us. Enough that he wouldn't feel threatened. Enough that hope could slip in. He looked at me, then at the food, then back again. His whole body was wound tight like a wire. A step forward, a step back, again and again. A strange little dance between fear and longing. "It's okay, Knight," I whispered, voice barely louder than the wind. "No one's going to hurt you anymore." I had no idea how much he understood, but my voice trembled too. Maybe I was talking to myself as much as to him. The breeze carried the scent of pine and damp earth mingling with the faint musk of wet fur. Somewhere above, a crow called. Knight flinched paws, slipping on the wet road, then froze again. His head lowered, ears pressed down, but his eyes stayed on me. They weren't empty anymore. They were searching. Is this time different? I waited 1 minute, 2. The world had narrowed down to just our breaths in the fog. Then he inched forward. Neck stretched, nose close to the ground, breath shallow and quick. His claws scraped softly against the wet asphalt. Such a short distance, but for him it might as well have been a mountain. I kept my eyes calm, my body still. Didn't move closer. He hesitated again. A raindrop fell from a pine branch, landing on his back. He jolted, whimpered softly, the tremor returning. I knew if I pushed even a little he'd bolt. So I did the only thing I could. I turned my face away. I looked toward the trees, pretending not to care. Not to trick him, but to give him something he'd never had before, the right to choose. The right to decide who takes the first step. A few seconds later, I heard the faintest sound, tiny paws shifting against the gravel. Then silence, then closer. When I turned my head, Knight was less than 2 meters away. His eyes were wide, glistening in the mist. His nose is wet, tail barely moving. I held my breath, hands resting loose on my knees. 1 second, 2. Then he bent down, sniffed the meat, and swallowed it fast, retreating, but not too far. He didn't run. I smiled, just barely, afraid even the sound of it might break the fragile moment. "Good boy," I murmured. "Good job, Knight." He tilted his head as if unsure what the words meant, but his ears perked up. Something had shifted, small but real. A first crack in the wall of fear. I took out another tiny piece of meat, placed it a bit closer, then waited again. No movement. No words. Just the smell of dried meat and the steady rhythm of 2 hearts waiting in the fog. Knight stepped closer. His small shadow touched mine on the wet road. Just 2 shadows meeting in the mist, but I swear, my chest ached like someone had squeezed it tight. I thought about whoever had left him there, someone cruel enough to walk away from this trembling little life. And I made a silent promise, however long it took, I'd show him that not all humans were like that. He leaned closer. His nose brushed my knee, then pulled back. I said nothing, let the moment pass quiet as a prayer. The wind shifted. Knight lifted his head. His brown eyes met mine for the first time without fear. And in that moment, I understood trust doesn't grow from words. It grows in the silence where patience lives. And I also knew, from that moment on, my life would never be the same again. Noonlight filtered through the pine trees, laying pale gold stripes across the damp road. The mist had begun to lift, revealing Knight standing right in front of me. Small, soaked back, slightly arched tail faintly wagging. From a distance, he looked like a fragment of darkness learning how to step into the light. I didn't move. Both of us understood one wrong move, and we'd be back at the beginning. Knight licked his lips, then suddenly barked, short, sharp, and out of place in the quiet woods. Not a warning bark. A test. I smiled softly. "Yeah, I'm scared too, kid," I murmured. He tilted his head, ears pricking up, then circled me halfway. His paws brushed against the gravel, the sound as faint as a nervous heartbeat. Every time I thought he'd come closer, he backed away again, staying just far enough that he could still run if he had to. It was the strangest dance I'd ever seen two souls who didn't know how to begin to trust. I crouched lower, closer to the ground, and placed another strip of dried meat beside my boot. Knight's eyes flickered bright for an instant, but he didn't approach. He made another cautious loop, then stopped about 5 steps away. I kept my gaze forward, pretending not to watch. I knew that, in his world, eye contact meant threat. Silence meant safety. A moment later, I heard a soft sound behind me, his breathing. I didn't turn, only steadied my own breath. Then came the faintest sound, a paw brushing the dirt as soft as a falling leaf. Knight was moving closer. I said nothing, didn't move. His breath mingled with the damp scent of earth and pine resin, and then suddenly he barked again, louder this time, and bolted into the woods, tail tucked, tripping over a dry branch. I flinched, but didn't chase him. I just sat there watching his small shadow vanish behind the ferns. Moments later, I heard gravel crunching again. Knight returned. His little head peeked out, first ears, erect eyes locked on me. I exhaled quietly, barely audible even to myself. "It's okay, Knight, I'm still here," I said softly, my voice slow, calm as wind through leaves. He hesitated. A minute passed, then another. And then he began to circle me again, this time closer. At moments no more than 1/2 meter away. I could see his breath in the cool air, little clouds of fog drifting between us. He stopped right in front of me, head tilted, eyes wide and questioning. "Are you really different?" I bowed my head slightly, careful not to break the spell. "I am," I whispered. "I won't walk away." And then something miraculous happened. Knight didn't run. He let out a small whimper, soft as the cry of a lost child calling for someone they're not sure still exists. My throat tightened, because I realized every flicker of fear in his eyes was just a reflection of my own. After losing the woman I loved, I too had hidden from the world, afraid that opening my heart again would only lead to another loss. There we were, two broken creatures testing each other's faith through silence. I took a slow breath and did what instinct told me was right. I stood up, brushed the dirt from my jeans, and turned away. I didn't rush. Each step was deliberate, carrying a quiet message I trust you'll follow. Behind me, I heard the faint patter of paws. Then silence. Then the sound again, closer. I didn't look back, just smiled. Knight was following me, but still keeping a few steps between us, as if an invisible thread stretched tight between two worlds. Every time I slowed, he slowed. Every time I stopped, he stopped. No chasing, no fear, just presence, two beings stitching trust back together, one breath at a time. Overhead, the sun finally pierced through the thinning fog, lighting up his drenched fur. And for the first time, I saw Knight lift his head toward the light, not out of curiosity, but because he finally felt safe enough not to bow anymore. In that moment, I knew I hadn't just found a stray puppy. I'd found a lesson in patience I would carry for the rest of my life. The sun was fading, scattering thin shards of light across the winding mountain road. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, and in that pale golden haze, I sat with my back against the old milestone, eyes fixed on the small shape before me. Knight stood there, fur-drenched, sunlight glinting off him in threads of gold. He'd followed me all afternoon, never closer than a few steps, close enough to see me, but not enough to trust. I knew trust had no shortcut. It only came through waiting. And so I waited. The wind grew colder. I saw him shiver, front legs trembling slightly, eyes blinking against the dust carried by the breeze. I reached into my backpack, pulled out my thin jacket, and quietly laid it on the ground. Not toward him, not as an invitation, just near the edge of the road. Knight looked at it, stretched his neck, and sniffed the air. In his eyes, I saw not panic, but struggle. The fight between the will to live and the memory of betrayal. I took a slow breath and whispered, "No one's going to hurt you anymore. I promise." He took half a step forward. My chest tightened. Every movement had to be gentle enough that even the gravel under my boots could be heard shifting. And then he moved closer, not out of trust, but out of exhaustion. A small soul that had simply run out of strength to be afraid. When his nose brushed the fabric of my jacket, I held my breath. Knight sniffed it for a long moment, then drew his head back. For a second, I thought we'd have to start all over again. But he didn't leave. He looked at me, a long, deep, heavy gaze. I knew what it meant. This was the moment that would decide everything. If I rushed it, I'd lose him forever. So I did the only thing left to do. I crouched slowly, lowering my hand until it was level with the ground, palm open. Not reaching, not retreating, just waiting. Time seemed to stop. The air thickened around us. The sound of my heartbeat mingled with his fragile breathing. Knight inched closer, nose trembling until it brushed the tips of my fingers. Then suddenly he jerked back, barking once, sharp, frightened. I didn't move, kept my hand where it was still open, still waiting. He froze, ears, drooping eyes wide. Maybe in his memory a hand had always meant pain. I lowered my voice, soft as if speaking to a child. "It's okay, Knight. No one will hurt you again." This time, he didn't run. He stepped forward again slowly, carefully, his nose twitching, breath uneven. In his eyes, I saw my own reflection, blurred but real. When his head finally touched my hand, the world went silent. I didn't dare move, just felt that tiny warmth spread across my palm. He let out a faint whimper, a sound caught between fear and relief, as if his heart had just cracked open a little. Gently, I slid my hand up to his neck. Instantly, Knight panicked, jerking struggling claws, scraping. His cry split through the quiet evening. I held on, but not tightly. Just enough to draw him closer against my chest, my arm around his cold, trembling body, whispering, "Easy, boy, I'm not going to hurt you. I swear." He fought for a moment, then suddenly stopped. The small body in my arms trembled with what felt like the last pulses of fear. I could feel his hot breath against my neck, and then only silence. Knight's eyes stayed open, breathing shallow. But I could feel it. He was letting go, bit by bit. As if for the first time in his life he was allowed to stop fighting without being hit. I lowered my chin onto his wet head and whispered, "You're safe now, Knight. You're safe." In that moment, I wasn't sure who had been saved, him or me. All I knew was that the trembling in my arms was no longer that of a stray dog, but of a small heart learning how to trust again. Rain started falling as I left Pisgah Forest. The sound of raindrops drummed against the windshield, blending with Knight's shallow, trembling breaths in my arms. I had wrapped him in my old jacket, feeling each small shiver ripple through my chest with every breath he took. Each time the truck jolted over a pothole, he flinched, whimpered, then pressed himself closer against me. The road back to Asheville grew darker by the minute. Streetlights blurred into streaks across the wet glass. I kept one hand on his back, stroking gently. Every motion had to be slow, as if I were touching a wound that hadn't yet healed. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was already on. Rachel Monroe stood under the awning, a cup of tea in her hand, the soft glow of the porch lamp lighting her calm face. When she saw me holding that small, shaking bundle, she didn't ask a single question. She just opened the door and said quietly, "Come in, Ethan. Don't let him get cold." My cabin wasn't much. Inside, it was warm and smelled faintly of dry pine wood and cold coffee. I laid Knight on the rug beside the fireplace. The small flame flickered reflected in his wet brown eyes. I took a towel and gently wiped his soaked fur, careful not to move too fast. Even so, each time my hand brushed against him, he flinched, ready to bolt. Rachel sat by the fire, keeping her distance close enough to see far enough not to intrude. She didn't speak, didn't call him, didn't reach out. She just sat there, hands resting open on her knees, eyes lowered, quiet as still water. I sighed. "You think he's scared of me?" I asked. Rachel shook her head, a faint smile crossing her lips. "He's not afraid of you, Ethan. He's afraid of his memories." Her words stopped me cold. Knight was still hiding behind the chair, eyes tracking every movement in the room. Droplets fell from his fur, forming tiny dark marks on the floor that shimmered in the firelight. I was about to take a step closer when Rachel lifted her hand slightly. "Don't push," she whispered. "Let him choose." So we waited. Just the three of us, the woman, the man, and the small trembling life curled in the corner. No TV. No sound of rain anymore. Only the steady crackle of the fire and 3 breaths mingling softly in the quiet cabin. At first, Knight stayed hidden. But then his ears twitched, his nose lifted, sniffing the air, Tea-wood people. Each breath seemed like a question. "Is this place safe?" Rachel said nothing. She simply sat there, her presence calm and open. She didn't look directly at him yet. Somehow, her quiet steadiness began to fill the space between them. Then, slowly, Knight stepped out of the shadow. One careful step at a time, like someone testing the surface of thin ice. When he was just a few feet from her, he stopped. Rachel didn't move. A moment passed. Then he lowered his head and sniffed her knee. Still, she stayed still. Then came the smallest thing, his nose brushed her hand. A brief trembling touch. Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. "It's okay, little one." But that sentence wasn't only for Knight. It was for me, too, the man who had forgotten what it felt like to believe in something good. Knight sank down beside her, folding his legs under him. His eyes drifted closed, breathing steadying, slowing. For the first time, he didn't try to escape. I stood there, frozen, watching a woman and an animal find each other not through words, but through stillness. I realized then, some things don't need language. Only presence, only honesty, only the choice to stay. That night, there were no more sounds of fear. Just the rhythm of calm breathing and the soft crackle of fire filling the room with warmth. And I thought maybe healing doesn't begin with words. Maybe it begins when someone finally sits beside you quietly and doesn't leave. That night, I didn't sleep. The rain tapped steadily against the porch roof, ticking like an old clock. Knight lay curled in the corner, his head resting on the towel Rachel had spread out for him. The fire in the hearth had burned low, leaving only faint embers pulsing red like the weak heartbeat of the little creature beside it. Rachel was still there, sitting with her back against the wall, eyes never leaving that trembling body. She didn't speak. Every so often, she simply lifted a hand to block the draft sneaking through the doorframe. I watched her, a slender woman, impossibly patient, as if she could sit there all night just to protect a single, fragile breath. "You're really planning to stay up all night?" I asked, softly, afraid my voice might wake the fear that was finally sleeping. Rachel smiled faintly. "I'm not staying up," she whispered. "I'm just here." Those words hit something deep. Just here, simple. Yet it's what so many souls, human or not, spend a lifetime longing for. Knight whimpered in his sleep legs, twitching as if running from something. Maybe even in dreams he still heard the sound of engines or the slam of the hand that once threw him away. Rachel slowly leaned down, lying on her side across the floor, just a few handspans away from him. She didn't touch, didn't call. She simply slowed her breathing steady, soft, calm. And then something changed. Night inhaled sharply, eyes opening, head turning toward her. He saw her. His eyes were still wet, but no longer wild. She didn't flinch, nor did she stare. She just smiled gently, eyes warm, and murmured, "Go to sleep, little one. You're safe now." Knight hesitated, then inched forward, bit by bit, until his head came to rest close to her hand. She stayed still, palm open on the wooden floor. A moment later, Knight lay his nose against her hand like someone searching for warmth after a nightmare. Then his breathing steadied. 2 rhythms, hers and his slowly sinking inhale and exhale until the world outside faded away. The fire popped softly. The rain kept its rhythm. And in that small wooden cabin, only 2 living beings remained awake, sharing breath warmth and the fragile thread of rediscovered trust. I stood in the doorway, not daring to move, afraid even the sound of my step might break that fragile grace, because I knew this was the real miracle, not one made of medicine or pity, but of quiet presence. The kind of patience most people no longer know how to give. The night drifted on like that. When I woke, the first light of morning was slipping through the window. Rachel was still on the floor, sleeping on her side, breathing steadily. But Knight, he wasn't in the corner anymore. He was sitting right beside her, head up, ears perked, eyes turned toward the window as if waiting for something new. I stepped forward, the floorboards creaking softly. Knight turned his head, and morning light caught in his eyes. For a moment I thought he'd retreat like always, but he didn't. He stood, trembling slightly, and walked toward me. No hiding behind chairs, no hesitation, just slow, certain steps. When he stopped in front of me, he lifted his head-tail, wagging in slow, deliberate arcs. I knelt, opened my arms. For the first time, no food, no coaxing, no words. Knight came to me on his own. He stepped into my arms. I held him close, feeling the warmth of his fur, the quick pulse beneath his chest, the breath against my neck. He made a small sound, not of fear, but of release. Rachel stirred, opened her eyes, and smiled, sleepy, soft, knowing. "Told you," she murmured. "Sometimes you just have to be there." I looked down at Knight, the same puppy once left on the side of the road, now resting his head against me, eyes closed. The morning light glowed on his black and tan coat, transforming him into something new. No longer a victim, but someone loved. I stroked his head and whispered like a vow, "From now on, I'll never let you face this world alone again." Outside, the rain had stopped. The first wind carried the scent of wet earth and hope. And there, in that small wooden house in Asheville, I understood, sometimes healing isn't a grand miracle. It's simply 2 breaths finding the same rhythm after too many seasons of fear. A month passed. Spring had settled over Asheville, no more rain, no more cold mist. That morning, sunlight streamed through the pines behind the house, spreading a thin layer of silver dew across the grass. Knight was running. Not running to escape anymore, but running to live. His black and tan coat shimmered in the sun as his 4 legs cut across the yardtail, wagging so wildly it seemed to scatter light around him. I leaned against the porch rail, coffee cup in hand, eyes following every leap he made. Each time the rubber ball rolled away, Knight chased it down, caught it in his mouth, then turned back toward me with a mischievous gleam, the kind of look only a creature who knows he's safe can give. Rachel sat on the steps, camera in hand, capturing every moment. "I've never seen a Doberman smile like this," she said, half laughing, half choked. I smiled. Maybe he's teaching us how to breathe again. Knight stopped in the middle of the yard, ears up, the wind brushing through his neck fur. That looked so different from the one I saw the day I found him by the roadside. No fear, no shrinking away. Just a living being soaking in the sunlight after the storm. I stepped down into the grass, crouched. Come here, Knight. He hesitated for only a second before darting toward me, crashing straight into my chest, pressing his head against me like a gust of wind begging to be held. I laughed, a sound that rang through the still air, mingling with birdsong and the scent of damp wood. Rachel watched us, her smile softening. You know, she said quietly, at first, I thought you rescued him. But maybe he's the one who rescued you. I looked at Knight, the puppy who once trembled in fear, now tugging playfully at my sleeve. I said softly, Yeah, he reminds me that trust doesn't die, it just waits for someone patient enough to bring it back. We sat there for a long while, listening only to the wind and Knight's steady breathing. Everything felt strangely peaceful. No past, no fear. Just warmth, light, and the rhythm of a small life pulsing on green grass. Rachel stepped forward and patted Knight's head. He looked up, licked her hand, and circled us in wide, happy loops as if saying, This is home now. I watched them, feeling something in me finally go still. All the emptiness, the loneliness, the regret, it all seemed to dissolve in the sound of his paws against the ground. I knew Knight would never understand words like rescued or healed, but he understood love. He understood what it meant for someone to stay. And maybe that was enough. That evening, Rachel posted a photo of Knight on the local rescue page with the caption, 1 month after being found, Knight has learned to trust again. There was no miracle, just patience, presence, and hands that refused to leave halfway. The photo spread quickly. People shared it, wrote their own stories, and said they, too, had a Knight in their lives, whether it was a dog, a cat, or themselves after heartbreak. That night, as I closed the porch door, Knight was already curled up at my feet. Rachel looked over and whispered, Do you think kindness has a sound? I smiled. It does. It sounds exactly like this. I glanced down at Knight. His breathing, steady eyes closed completely at peace. Outside, the night wind swept through the pines, whispering like the voices of souls finally forgiven. And in that small wooden house in Asheville, I knew no matter how frightened, how broken every living being can be saved, if someone is willing to stay long enough. Sometimes miracles aren't about how many lives we save, but about the moment we make one soul believe. That goodness still exists in this world. If Knight's story made you pause for a moment, if in his eyes you saw the most fragile part of yourself, or if you believe that every soul deserves a second chance, hit subscribe to help us share more stories like this one. Leave a comment, I believe in second chances, and share this video. Because somewhere out there, another Knight might still be waiting, before it's too late.